Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about Justice League, and this time we're going to look at false equivalencies and some of the news that's just false out there. First of all, we'll start off with Cyborg. So the information we got about Cyborg through Joe Morton is something that's really widely known in the lore of Cyborg. If you've watched any Cyborg animation or any comics, read any comics of Cyborg, you know that his father, Silas Stone, he's not very fond of him for several different reasons. And one of the reasons is that his father doesn't think anything he does is important. The second reason is that even when his father saves his life, he has this appearance which no longer feels human. And to Cyborg, it's kind of repugnant, it's kind of grotesque, and he has nowhere to hide. He has to try and cover it up. So for Cyborg, he has these almost very ill feelings towards his father. Doesn't like speaking about his father. So this is nothing new that really was said here. Nonetheless, this information here, which was being propagated by certain left-wing people, it's really, really dumb, okay? Now, I've even seen the right-wing people try to embrace this. Fox News Judge Janine, she went and interviewed Donald Trump, and in doing so, she was speaking about, setting justice, and she tried to infer, using language from the Justice League, that, Donald Trump was the face of justice. And it really annoyed me no end, because, let me put it to you guys this way. There are very nice Republican people out here. Okay, there are people who their belief in the Republic system, and the Republican system, let me just make it abundantly clear for people who don't understand. The Republican system can work in America. In fact, quite frankly, you have to be a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat to get things done in America. I want to mention one gentleman who I really appreciate. I wish he was the President of the United States of America right now. And that gentleman is the governor, I believe, of Ohio State, Mr. Kasich. Mr. Kasich gets the highest amount of respect from me because the man is a man of moral standards, integrity, and if that guy was running against Hillary Clinton in the primaries, I'm sure he would beat her because the guy's presidential material. And he's fair, he's a realist, and yet he's a Republican. I can mention several Republicans that are in the Senate who are really decent people with ideas. So don't get it twisted. I'm not against Republicans. But there is a certain culture of Republicans today who are partisan. They have no ideas for constructive ideas, that is. They're very destructive. They're racist. They have racist policies. And they are minimalists. I'm not saying all Republicans are like that. I'm not even saying the majority of Republicans are like that. Even though their base seems to show that their base supports some of these racist policies and a lot of racist things and a lot of restrictive things. The fact that still a majority of Republicans support Donald Trump is very, very disturbing. But having said that, there is a good amount of Republicans who don't support him. A substantial amount. Upwards of 40%. So, you cannot say that the Republican Party and the Republicans and the standards they have are racist, corrupt, and low. You can't say that. Similarly, I can't say that all Democrats and all liberals are that way. However, we can clearly see that there are some liberals who are just disgusting. And you can see it in media, you can see it in certain sections of Hollywood. And they're destructive. Not as destructive, I say, as some extreme right-wing Republicans can be destructive without any sense or logic, but still, I still believe the same. I'm saying this not to down Republicans or Democrats, but to say this. that common sense that prevails is going to have to combine some of the aspects of the Republicans and their ideals, and some of the aspects of the Democrats and their ideals. The Democrats are known to want to foster the civilians, especially the poor and the least franchised. The Republicans like to focus on business and how to build upward mobility through business. There's nothing wrong with either of these two concepts. The problem is when you're focused on big business and fostering big business at the expense of small businesses and at the expense of the general population. This has been expressed in a very extreme way through the alt-right, which are only focused on one particular part of the population, and the rest of the population can go to hell. And that is not America. In terms of the left-wingers, they get ridiculous and naggy and sometimes very disgusting when they label people and then they attack them. And they attack them relentlessly. And they're very partisan in the way how they do things, very political and partisan. And that's not cool either. The negative politics that was implemented by the Republicans, mostly in Congress and to a lesser extent in the Senate, in Barack Obama's reign, in which this guy was very constructive and very much in the middle. He was very much a moderate Democrat, moderate Republican, is sad. Hillary Clinton is also a very moderate Democrat, moderate Republican. These are not extreme people except for their policies on gay rights, etc. I say this to say that most of the former presidents have not been extremist right-wingers like Donald Trump is, with the extremist right-wingers in his cabinet, Steve Bannon's and Company Limited. He's even surrounded himself with generals who are military, which is a scary prospect when you think about it. I say all of this not to say that the generals are bad people per se, but just that the decisions, the logistics of these generals would be mostly under certain lines. There is no diversity in his cabinet. So I say all of this to say this. Please do not equate Donald Trump's regime and the alt-right, because there is no alt-left as far as I know, with the Justice League. The Justice League is absolutely nothing. Furthermore, do not equate them with 300. The left-wingers who are saying this nonsense need to stop. The Spartans never went out and sought war with people, never killed people in what was supposed to be peaceful rallies and protests, never plunged their cars into innocent people. No. Spartans just tried to defend themselves, and they were a small population, and they just simply defended themselves with valor. That is totally different to what these extremist fascist groups are doing. They exist among everybody else, but instead they decide to commit genocide to try to level the scales because they feel that their advantages are diminishing. It's totally different. Can't equate Adolf Hitler with the Justice League. You just don't do that. And that's what's going on today. Okay? Right. So, left-wingers, you need to lay off of Zack Snyder. If you hate the dude, that's one thing. Zack Snyder is an open-minded guy. Zack Snyder has been very inclusive of different groups and Warner Brothers as well. And yes, there have been the Koch brothers who've been sponsoring, and somehow they got their teeth up in Wonder Woman and in some other projects. I don't know if the actors or the directors even knew this. And that's not cool. But at the same time, I must say that seeing so many investors abandon Donald Trump at this point in time tells me that people are letting common sense prevail. Common sense is important. What I mean by this, for you guys to understand, is as Americans, we cannot go against each other. When the push comes to shove, we're Americans. We're not Republicans. We're not Democrats. I personally, I'm annoyed with the bickering. When Zack Snyder's daughter died, I saw all of these crazy people come together. Okay? Zack Snyder has a deep history of the comics. Everything he's doing is so deep and so cool. And I'm a huge Zack Snyder fan, obviously. But besides that, the dude has never tried to commit acts of violence to anyone. And all his intentions in all of his so-called violent movies and murder verses, all of his intentions have always been beautiful and good. That's why I defend this dude. I don't defend Donald Trump. I don't defend his regime. I defend that Zack Snyder. Think about this. Why would I do that? If Zack Snyder was in the same line with Donald Trump and company, and I'm not saying that Zack Snyder has a political allegiance. I don't know what he is. I don't know if he's Republican or Democrat. I don't know if he's a Christian or if he's an atheist or what he is. That's not the point. The point is the guy puts value in his movies. And he talks about things like globalism versus nationalism. That's what's in his movies, man. Globalism is not very popular now. But Zack Snyder says we're humans. We're humans first. Doesn't matter what part of the earth we come from. We'll die and leave the part of the earth back there. And then somebody else will shape the landscape and call it after their name. But in the meantime, we're humans first. Humanity. That's what globalization was supposed to be all about. Humanity. So, please, stop with the false equivalency. Next, there's this crazy fan logic out there that the Mattel figures are revealing part of the plot of Justice League. That Green Lantern somehow is equated to this parademon. That it's actually Green Lantern, maybe even Hal Jordan, has been taken captive by Darkseid's forces, converted into parademon. It's a very interesting idea, but I don't think that's what Zack's going for in this movie. He said it's a very straightforward plot movie. So when you try to get convoluted like that, it causes the storyline to be a lot more difficult to tell. Zack won't go into all of that. Trust me, he ain't going into all of that. Okay? So I don't expect Green Lantern to be anywhere associated with Darkseid in terms of a captive of him or minion, or the Green Lantern's a captive of Darkseid. I don't think that's happening. Justice League had their hands full just dealing with Steppenwolf and his forces. I mean, that other stuff. And we haven't seen any parademons that look like this to start with. Okay? I'm just saying. We've seen the green glow in them, though. Alright, let's go on to something else. So the next theory is that on the box of these, where is it? It says various merchandise. So they didn't even say specifically what merchandise it is. They say that Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Cyborg, and Flash are barely holding their own against invading parademons and axe-wielding Steppenwolf. If only Superman in Funko figure form was here. It's Funko figures. Look up in the sky. Is that Superman? It is. It's the Superman Justice League movie Funko Pop vinyl figure. And it's resurrected itself moments before Steppenwolf skewered Wonder Woman with a hefty chunk of Venezuela. Took a whole freaking island and landmass and just threw it at Wonder Woman, right? Now, we know that that's their imagination that's coming up with this, and that's why it's so ludicrous that obviously this is not real. But again, these sites, they take it as if it's fact, and they just go with it. I guess they're searching for new information for Justice League. I can't fault them. But still, at the same time, what they could do, too, to make it interesting, is start pulling up comic books. Start pulling up comic books and share with people about the Justice League. That's what you can start to do. And get them up to speed in the comic books. And get them to buy the comic books. Because, look, people, the whole reason behind a comic book movie is so people can get interested in the comic books. And you can get comic books now online and read them. Some of them you can read free. It doesn't matter if you get them for free or what. It's important to just read them, because when you read a comic book, a DC comic book, you get so much more out of the comic book. Comic book's always better than the movie. Always better than the movie. When you read a comic book, when you read a book, period, it's always better than what someone else imagined. So I advise people, go read the comic books. So when you see the stuff in the movie, you can fanboy out and get all crazy, and you also understand the context of the stuff. I'm not saying you have to read comic books to know these movies. I mean, the movies, they're pretty self-explanatory. I never read Valerian City of a Thousand Planets comic. It's a comic book, by the way. I didn't read the comic book, right? I listened to the director, I listened to reviews, and I went and watched the movie. And then I watched the movie, and I followed the movie easy. It was easy to follow, right? Cool movie. But you get so much more from reading the book. The book is so much better than the movie. Always. Okay? So I always advise people, go read comic books. If you call yourself a nerd, how can you be adverse to reading? I mean, come on now. If you say you're a comic book nerd, then you need to read comic books. It's common sense. Anyway, on that note, you guys have a great one.